So you may know, because I've talked about it at the holidays and a number of other times, that I'm a big crossword fan. And I want to tell you about something that happened in the world of crosswords today that you may not be aware of if you're less of a nerd than I am. There was a little controversy that boiled up in the online crossword community today following the publication of the New York Times mini crossword. Spoiler alert, if you haven't done it yet, I'm going to ruin one of the clues for you right now. So in the mini crossword, 2 down, was a 5-letter word whose clue was herald of spring. Not the man's name Harold, H-E-R-A-L-D, herald of spring. The answer was, I remember? Robin. Yes, Robin. 5-letter word, herald of spring. So that was the answer to the mini crossword, and that answer kicked off a raging debate online between crossword fanatics and bird fanatics, because the birders insisted that the American robin actually does not migrate during the winter, and so could not be rightly described as a herald of spring. Okay? So that was today's news in the crossword community. The fight has mostly simmered down by now, but earlier today it was quite dramatic and extremely adorable. Coincidentally, this debate about robins and whether or not they actually migrate popped up just as I was concluding a fairly obsessive deep dive into a related topic that has confounded scientists for years. I listened to a podcast earlier this week, thanks to a recommendation from Rabbi Fixler, about some fascinating new research in the field of sensory biology. Scientists are recently uncovering some new answers to a big question that are just starting to come into focus over the last couple of years. The basic question is this. We've known for centuries that certain species of birds migrate during the winter months and return home to their native breeding grounds when the weather warms up again in the springtime. And today, we have very clear knowledge about which birds travel to which destinations, how long they spend there, what routes they take on their outbound and return flights. But what has always baffled scientists is the question of how they do it. How do they know where to go? Which path to take to get there? How can their onboard navigation systems be so precise that they can deliver those birds, in some cases to the same branch on the same tree thousands of miles away, year after year after year? So up until now, the presumption has been that the birds use some combination of visual and auditory information to trace their path. They can see the ridges and valleys of mountain ranges, and they can follow them to their destination, or they can hear sounds like ocean surf pounding the shoreline at a low frequency that their ears are particularly sensitive to. Or perhaps inspired by a discovery about 150 years ago that the beaks of migratory birds contain tiny crystals of iron, maybe those little magnetic deposits orient the birds in flight by using Earth's magnetic field. So now we fast forward to the late 20th century and the development of modern subatomic physics. It's going to get a little nerdy, so stick with me. And I hope there are no physicists in the room, because if there are, I'm sunk. No? Okay, I'm good, fine. Okay, good. So one of the discoveries that scientists arrived at just in the last generation is a phenomenon that they call quantum entanglement, which is such a charming turn of phrase, quantum entanglement. I'm going to try to explain this accurately, even though I'm not entirely sure that I understand it myself. But the concept is this. If you remember the model of the atom that you may have learned in high school, there's a nucleus in the middle with electrons whirling and orbiting around it. And sometimes there's a pair of electrons orbiting together. And that pair of electrons behave in parallel ways. It's what the physicists call the electron's spin. And when 2 electrons are paired, they exhibit parallel behaviors. The spin of one matches the spin of the other. But what quantum physicists discovered is that if you can split up one of these pairs of electrons by firing a photon of light at it, you can knock it out of orbit and send one of the pair ricocheting onto another atom. And even if that atom lands at an enormous distance away from its original home and from its partner, the 2 electrons still stay paired. They're no longer physically proximate. They're no longer orbiting the same nucleus of the same atom, but they remain synchronized with one another. And if one electron changes its spin, changes its behavior, the behavior of the partner electron instantaneously changes as well, even though they're no longer physically bonded and occupying the same space. And when that happens, those two particles are said to be paired, connected, in quantum entanglement. Now, what scientists discovered just recently is that when that happened, when an entangled pair of electrons get knocked apart, both of those newly liberated particles suddenly becomes ultrasensitive to magnetic fields. Here's where it all comes together. As it turns out, there is a pigment molecule in the eyes of migratory birds that is sensitive to light. And when those molecules are hit by photons like those emitted from the sun or the stars, the electron pairs whirling around the nucleus are knocked apart, one flying this way, one flying that way, slipping into orbit around other atoms elsewhere in the bird's eye. And now those quantumly entangled particles, mysteriously but indivisibly bound together, become 10 million times more sensitive to the planet's magnetic field. So thanks to these subatomic processes in their eyes, the birds cook up their own internal chemical compasses, granting themselves a new orientation for navigating, new eyes, as it were, for seeing the world, banking past mountain ranges and whirling along the sprawling magnetic bands that blanket the earth. The birds find their way, guided on unthinkably long journeys, in some cases over thousands of miles, and then back home again. And their compasses are calibrated by the stars. When their eyes are struck by photons that have traveled for an equally unimaginable time, radiating down to Earth from stars that may be 10 million years old or more. It is mind-boggling. And the question that sticks with me when I learned and explored about these ideas is this: what does it feel like for the bird? This is a question that captivated me all week. The scientists don't seem to care about what it feels like for the bird, but I can't get it out of my mind. What is it like to be steered like that? To be directed firmly but lovingly by something ancient and powerful outside the self? Does it feel like memory, like an unfolding experience of déjà vu, where you have an indescribable sense that you're moving through something that a deep and unexplored part of yourself has already experienced? Or is it a physical sensation, like you're being pulled or pushed by something larger and more forceful than yourself? Or is it visual, since it takes place in the bird's eye? Does the world look different when your eyes come alive in that new way? Can you see things you never saw before, finding clues in the landmarks and the complex patterns of shorelines and forests and fields? Or does it feel perhaps like hunger, a deep and primal appetite, an urgent need to move, to fly, to strain forward toward a place you've never known, but which feels like a sort of promise, whispered about in the light of the stars? We Jews are a migratory people. The volumes of our history and the records of our family stories are packed tight with inspiring and heartbreaking accounts of long and winding journeys. All of us have stories about those who came before us, tracing circuitous routes fraught with uncertainty, in search of freedom, in search of new homes. What were the forces that directed your family's migrations? Perhaps they left because they were pulled, drawn by the attractive allure of safety and liberty, enticed by the promise of honest work or by the entreaties of distant relatives willing to help them get settled. Or perhaps they were pushed, shoved out of the places they once called home by anti-Semitic violence or legislation, by racism, by persecution, by exile and fear. Or perhaps your family was one of those who simply picked up and left, setting out with no destination in mind, leaving only because they could not stay. Even today, perhaps we can detect some of the primal tugs of the Jewish subconscious. We can sense the urgency and fear. We can remember them in a way, although we may not have experienced them ourselves. We can feel in an indescribably personal way what it's like to be desperate enough to float one's own baby down a river in a basket, and at the same time hopeful enough to know that there is a world beyond slavery and suffering. Passover is just a week away. For the birds and for the Jews, the springtime is the season of homecoming. It's a time when we're drawn once again into the reassuring current of our spiritual migration, gathered back into our national story, back into the familiar contours of the history that makes us who we who once were slaves and now are free. We know those ancient stories as well as we know our own names. When we sit around our Seder tables next week, it will be as if we are personally experiencing them side by side with our most ancient ancestors. Uncertainty and upheaval, oppression and exile, liberation and homecoming, their lives are relived in us. Generation after generation, hope and fear and faith tying us together in the deepest sort of quantum entanglement. Though we are separated by time and space, the bond we share means that what happens to one of us happens to all of us. Those who join us at our tables, and even those from whom we are most distant, they too remain with us, their presence as real and tangible as that of those seated next to us. This is religious peoplehood. And every Passover blessing, every melody, every bite of the festival meal is an act of holy devotion in its service. To be part of this people, this timelessly striving Jewish people, is to be lovingly, eternally enfolded in spiritual quantum entanglement. Passover calls to us that it is time to come home to who we are, to come home to who we are meant to become, come home to the land of promise where the universe's most powerful yearnings for us will come true. And on every step of that journey, we are guided like sun-dazzled songbirds, calibrating our compasses by the light of ancient stars now long gone. Their luminance shines in us and through us as we, all of us together, make our way home once more. Shabbat shalom, everyone.